Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View on Friday. Of course, we heard that Robert Mueller dropped his investigation, the report, I should say. And as a result, of course, then you've had the summary by the Attorney General William Barr. Everybody's talking about it. We'll talk about it a little bit, but again, there are just a lot of other issues to focus our time and attention on, especially here in the state of Texas. Just a few minutes, we'll be talking with Jonathan Saenz about the decision by those in the city council in San Antonio to prevent Chick-fil-A from actually serving Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches at the San Antonio airport. And as I said in a commentary that'll come out next week, we've been down this road before. Remember when the Denver City Council about 4 years ago tried to do that? Didn't last very long, because a couple of the attorneys for the Denver City Council and the Denver governor pointed out, you know what? This is called First Amendment, and if you are using political prejudice against an organization like Chick-fil-A, there will be a First Amendment lawsuit, and you will lose. And so they back down. We'll see what happens in San Antonio, but nevertheless, that's something we'll talk about this hour. Next hour, I might just mention that we have in studio with us Stephen Bridge, and he is the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. And if you have never been to Jerusalem, let me just mention that it is used so often to illustrate, not necessarily for sure that that's the tomb of Jesus, but it certainly has a lot of similarities to it. Could be. The place where the execution took place, Golgotha, which is, of course, the skull in Aramaic, or Calvary, which comes from the Latin for skull. You actually see the face of that mountain there, or hill, probably better description, that looks like a skull. Might have been, and of course, that is the traditional place where there had been executions in the past outside the city, stonings and things like that. So it's logical that that could have been the place where Jesus was crucified. And then, of course, they have a tomb that's cut into the wall. It's obviously a rich man's tomb, so, you know, it's a possibility. But even if it isn't, it certainly has been a place for people to meditate, to consider, to pray, to take communion. And so, again, we'll spend some time talking with him. And then the third hour, we'll go into more detail than what I'm going to go through in this half an hour that we have, talking about the Mueller report, which I appreciate some of our friends there at the Wall Street Journal called it the collusion illusion. I love how they say, well, so much for the claim that Donald Trump or his campaign conspired with Russians to steal the American presidency. The conspiracy theory, which has been distorted American politics for more than 2 years, expired in an instant Sunday when the Attorney General William Barr delivered Special Counsel Robert Mueller's principal conclusions to Congress. We are talking about something, and I sort of ran the numbers here, in which you have 22 months for this investigation. 34 people and 3 companies were indicted on scores of charges. Not all of those, by the way, in the United States, Russians and things like that. There were 2,800 subpoenas, nearly 500 search warrants, and interviews with about 500 witnesses. And that, if nothing else, illustrates the amount of time, energy, and resources to prove what I think most of us knew at the very beginning. Now, some people that are certainly trying to gain audience will spend time every single day talking about the Mueller investigation. If you've listened to this program, you know that we haven't. I just think there are other things to talk about in that regard. But nevertheless, going back to some of these reports, and I'll get into some of the things we've posted in the next segment in just a minute. But again, the Russian conclusion in particular ought to be good news. Our friends at the Wall Street Journal said Mr. Mueller spent 2 years and the vast resources of the FBI and the Justice Department to search for collusion. He found ample evidence that Russia did try to influence the election, but he found no one in the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign. That's what William Barr, the Attorney General, wrote. And, of course, people are calling for a full disclosure, and I will get into that in just a minute. That's one of the first articles we've posted on this. But, again, as they point out in this, the end of the collusion illusion should also cause the media to do some soul-searching about rushes to judgment. For 2 years, with the help of ex-Obama officials, they spun anecdotes of contacts between Russians, Trump campaign advisors into a conspiracy. With few exceptions, they went well beyond the First Amendment oversight into anti-Trump advocacy, but it was always odd that those individual Russian Trump contacts never added up to anything or went anywhere, which is why we warned, as they said, about those particular facts. So again, some of the writings that we have so far from the Attorney General, quote, "We did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election." On the question, though, of obstruction of justice, Robert Mueller, who I love, even our friends at NBC News, says, he was a Vietnam veteran, certainly not somebody to shy away from controversy, individual who led the FBI after 9/11. Nevertheless, when it came to the question of obstruction of justice, simply punted. They said in this particular article, Mueller didn't draw any conclusion one way or the other on obstruction, but instead set out evidence on both sides of the question. The Attorney General, Barr, said that because Mueller considered those facts and legal questions difficult to answer. And one of the individuals I've had on the program from time to time has been Alan Dershowitz. Now, again, as an individual, probably not somebody that would agree with most of the things we talk about here on Point of View, but I do appreciate his attempt to be honest. He used to be with the ACLU and left the ACLU because it got so political. And just the other day, he actually said that he thought this final report by Robert Mueller, and these are his words, looked like a law school exam, and was upset that he didn't really have the, if you will, the guts. Again, that's interestingly enough, some of the comments about Alan Dershowitz about that. And also was very critical of some of the various cable news shows that he said misinformed the American public. Here's one of his quotes. I won't spend a lot of time with Alan Dershowitz, but he said, "I thought it was a cop-out for him to say there was not enough evidence to indict, but it's not an exoneration. We're going to put the report out." He says, "It sounds like a law school exam. That's not the job of a prosecutor. The job of the prosecutor is to decide yes or no, make a decision." So that has certainly been something that has been critical as well. And, of course, Mueller did indict 25 Russians, including 12 intelligence officers. But, of course, as we well know, they will never see trial here in the United States. And even as you talk about the attempt to influence the election in 2016, our friend Gary Bauer has a great line. It's worth a reminder. Who was in charge of the American government when Russia was attempting to interfere the election? Well, that would be Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Loretta Lynch, John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, and a variety of other individuals that have been anti-Trumpers in the Justice Department and the FBI. Donald Trump had no influence ultimately as a government official in 2016, and yet that seems to be left out of some of the conversation as well. But if nothing else, we will come back and talk a little bit more about a couple of other issues. Number one is, okay, if we are going to have full disclosure, which I agree with, let's have full disclosure. And second of all, is this maybe embarrassing about how some of the media has covered it? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, for decades, sociologists have documented the phenomenon of extended adolescence. This is where someone who is an adult still acts like a teenager. One classic example would be a 35-year-old who has part of their rent and bills covered by parents and continues to take college classes. Jean Twenge, in her latest research on the trailing edge millennials, who she calls iGen, are extending this phenomenon even further. She documents that teenagers are becoming adults even later than the last generation. She argues that teens today are less prepared for adulthood. She also adds that they are safer since the rates of car accidents and teen pregnancies have fallen dramatically. Fewer 12th graders have tried alcohol. Back in 1994, 85% had tried alcohol. Today, only 66% have tried alcohol. Only 73% of 12th graders have driver's license, down from 85% 20 years ago. One of the most dramatic differences can be found in social dating. Only about half of them have been on a date. Compare that to 83% of 12th graders who had been on a date back in 1994 by their senior year. Another dramatic difference is one that we've talked about in the past, work experience. About half of 12th graders have worked for pay, which is down from 72% in 1994. Many more are taking college prep classes or hanging out at home. Now, all of these dramatic changes have resulted in a relatively new term being used by sociologists, emerging adulthood. This is their attempt to describe a new life stage between adolescence and adulthood. All of this reminds me of the jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." Maybe it's time for adults to say to the kids, it's time to grow up. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again just for a few more minutes, and then we're going to spend some time talking with our friend Jonathan Saenz about what is happening in San Antonio. Also, a couple of pro-life bills making their way through the Texas legislature, so I do want to focus some on Texas. But one of the challenges right now before those individuals in the Justice Department, and in particular the Attorney General, is now that he's released his summary, it's a 4-page summary, do you release the entire report? Now, that would go against precedent, but given the politicized situation we find ourselves in, I don't know that you can do anything other than have full disclosure, which brings me to a piece I'm going to read in just a minute by Andrew McCarthy, because he says, okay, if we're going to have full disclosure, let's have a full disclosure on the FISA warrants and everything else. But it is kind of interesting that a number of legal experts, let me mention one, Ken Starr, for example. Oh, he was a special prosecutor. Mark Levin, who is obviously a talk show host, but a legal scholar, and a number of others have said that if an individual is not indicted, the tradition has been and the precedent has been not to drag them through the mud by leaking details of an investigation if there's no crime that's been found. So the argument should be, well, we shouldn't have to release this, because even when you talk about the investigation of Bill Clinton that led to articles of impeachment, some of those things never saw the light of day. But that was then, and this is now. Also, I think Gary Bauer brings up a wonderful illustration. He says, don't miss the irony that for the last 2 years, we and many others have been asking for documents to be made public regarding who said what to the FISA courts that set off the unprecedented government monitoring of a presidential campaign. We're told that information was too sensitive to release. Now, he says the same left-wing members of Congress and their media allies who are demanding every word of the Mueller report defended the Justice Department and the FBI when it regularly sent incomplete information and redacted memos to congressional investigators for the past 2 years. Now, all of a sudden, they want total transparency. Which brings me to a piece that we've posted. It is a very long piece. It took me 10 pages to print out. I'm only going to summarize the parts of the first 3, but it's written by Andrew McCarthy. Again, to remind you, Andrew McCarthy is a senior fellow at the National Review Institute, but he's an individual that was one of the prosecutors in the first attack on the World Trade Center and brings a tremendous amount of kind of legal and judicial expertise to this, and points out that after Mueller's exoneration of Trump, I think that's an overplay. Exoneration means you've gone to a court. That's not happened. But again, people use exoneration, so we'll keep it in that. But again, the exoneration, full disclosure, he says the news that Special Counsel Robert Mueller closed his investigation without recommending criminal charges against President Trump is a relief. It's not a surprise. Nor is it a surprise that the news that Trump antagonists clamoring for full disclosure of the special counsel's final report. So he goes through and talks about some of the requirements and some of the questions and whether or not there might be a compromise of some defense secrets and those kinds of things. But he said, okay, if we're going to have full disclosure, fine, but let's have full disclosure. Mueller's report, in addition to the FISA applications, the memoranda pertinent to the opening and continuation of the investigation, the testimony in secret hearings, the scope memorandum written by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein issued on August 2nd, 2017, after failing to cite a crime when he appointed Mueller. Let's have all of it, he says. And so if nothing else, this is kind of what I think you may be hearing in the next couple of days. Okay, if we're going to have disclosure, let's have full disclosure. I'm all about that because sunlight is the best disinfectant. One other comment in this, and again, I'm just reading from page 3. This goes on for 10 pages, so you can read it because if nothing else, it's a great summary of why this investigation should not have taken place in the first place. But he says, since before Robert Mueller was appointed, he said, I've been contending that there is no legal basis for the appointment of a special counsel because there was no evidence that the president had committed a crime. And he goes on for pages to really document that this is a very sorry chapter in American history. But picking up on that, David French, who we quote so often here, said, I certainly agree with some of the things that Andrew McCarthy has said. And if nothing else, when you see that, again, the summary says the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, he says this is unambiguously good news. But also the Americans should feel greater confidence, he says, in the legitimacy of the 2016 election. They should reject once and for all the lurid conspiracy theories that have dominated parts of the internet and gained entirely too much purchase in the broader media. In the interest of time, I'll just use one example. Every once in a while, I like to beat up on Joy Reid. Well, she on MSNBC, Joy Reid says, it feels like the seeds of a cover-up are here. This is after the report. And I love David French's comments. This is irresponsible rhetoric. There's no evidence of a cover-up. Instead, there's a great deal of evidence that Mueller conducted a thorough and diligent investigation. Of course, you're going to hear this in the next couple of days. Mueller was the hero of the Democrats until he came to a conclusion they didn't want. Now he's going to be the villain. So, nevertheless. But again, one of the things that he wants to underscore, and I wanted to as well, is he said the American people really do need full disclosure, and not just the Mueller report. They need to see, as he said, the relevant FISA applications, supporting documents, classified testimony, any other evidence relevant to not just the Mueller investigation itself, but also to the inception of the Trump-Russia investigation. This conclusion is rendered even more urgent by two important political realities. If you're taking notes, you might number 1 and 2. Number 1 relates to the obstruction of justice. As the Attorney General Barr explains in his letter, the Mueller report neither accuses Trump of committing obstruction of justice in the course of the investigation, nor does it exonerate him. Instead, it says that they examined the evidence and that the evidence was not sufficient. So releasing those documents allows us to come to a reasonable, and that's assuming there are reasonable people out there, a reasonable conclusion about obstruction of justice. If there's no crime, how can you have obstruction of justice? But that would certainly set aside sometimes the very liberal, progressive talking points that have come out of MSNBC and CNN and all the rest. But then I appreciate David French by saying, number 2, there's also the important political reality to a common Republican theory of the Trump-Russian investigation, that it was conceived and pursued in bad faith for wholly partisan political reasons. Under this theory, the entire Trump-Russia controversy truly began as an act of Democrat collusion, the Clinton campaign's commissioning of the Fusion GPS to conduct opposition research that became the infamous Steele dossier. In other words, there certainly was a worse than Watergate corruption in 2016, but it was Democratic corruption. And so again, by releasing this, not only will it set aside, perhaps, at least for some people, the liberal talking points, but it might either set aside or confirm the so-called conservative talking points. And if you've ever turned on, say, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, some of the others, you hear this every single day. Well, this is kind of what you used to say when you were kids. Put up or shut up. Let's get the facts. Let's release the rest of those documents. Let's see if this theory is really the case, because he points out that he and even members of Congress like Trey Gowdy and others say there probably would have been an investigation without the Steele dossier anyway, without the FISA warrants. But if indeed we find something there that documents that, all the better. And then finally, he says nothing in Barr's letter excuses the fact that Trump hired and surrounded himself with some of the worst people in politics, felons and liars who sometimes committed crimes in an attempt to cover up their own contacts and attempted contacts with Russian assets or operatives. To be fair, especially when you talk about one or two of the individuals in the Trump campaign, they were sort of foisted upon them by the Republican Party that wanted this party to still have some kind of connection to this outsider by the name of Donald Trump. And Manafort in particular was kind of pushed on to the Trump campaign. Then later, of course, when he was indicted and convicted, they said, see, well, he probably wouldn't have had him on the campaign in the first place. But some of the others, including his lawyer, aren't necessarily the kind of people you want to surround yourself with if you're going to run a national presidential campaign. So I thought there were some good pieces in the David French article. I was going to say a little bit about the need for the press to actually apologize for some of the things they have done, some of the people they've brought on to actually attack the president or even make claims that are not justified, like John Brennan, but we'll get to those a little bit later. We come back, though, we are going to focus some time and attention on Chick-fil-A, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and the San Antonio Airport. All that coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Been talking about the Mueller investigation. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but especially during this 1 hour, I wanted to focus on some things happening in Texas. And of course, today the Texas Senate is hearing some pro-life bills and a number of other things. So that is the case. And so we'll get into that, what the Texas Senate, Texas House is doing. But you will notice that the first article we've posted here is Chick-fil-A not free to believe San Antonio bans new location. This is, of course, a link to our friends at txvalues.org. If you have not heard, in their inscrutable behavior, the city council decided that we don't want Chick-fil-A because we don't like their values. And this is a new one because I've talked about this before in the Denver airport where they rejected them because of their view about marriage and family and sexuality. But the ones in San Antonio added one more, and that is because also Chick-fil-A funds, are you ready for this? The Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and that's enough to ban Chick-fil-A from the San Antonio airport. So to help us understand what we can do in terms of supporting various pieces of legislation, Jonathan Saenz joins us once again, president of Texas Values, an individual in the past, worked, of course, with Liberty Institute in Austin. And Jonathan, thank you for joining us once again.
Well, it's great to be with you. And I'm here at the Capitol. I just stepped out of a committee room because it's Monday morning, but there's a lot of work being done. The Chick-fil-A issue is something you're going to hear a lot talked about at the Capitol today. We had a lot of lawmakers step up and talk about this. Senator Ted Cruz, I believe our Lieutenant Governor, several members, Senator Donna Campbell, and several members of the Texas House stepped up and put statements out. I mean, and this is something we've said has been brewing for a long time. Local governments and governments at other levels, they want to put their politics before what's best for business and for the constitutional rights, but particularly when it comes to the beliefs of Christians. And you pointed this out, Kerby. In this situation, the reason that the government and the city council at San Antonio has banned Chick-fil-A from having a store in their airport in San Antonio is because they gave money to the Salvation Army. They made a charitable donation to the Salvation Army, and as you mentioned, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and because of a donation they made, they have been banned. And so while there are other things that people have said about Chick-fil-A before, you have to wonder if this is the precedent here that governments are now going to be looking into donations that private business owners make and then discriminating against them, shutting them out of the marketplace because of things. And these are Christian entities, so it's hard to not say that if you want to do business in the city of San Antonio, they require you or commanding that you have to give up your religious beliefs just in order to run a business in the city of San Antonio. This has gone way too far.
One councilman, I love what he said. The irony's here just immense. Everyone has a place here, and everyone should feel welcome when they walk through our airport, except that doesn't apply to Chick-fil-A. And I loved how Chick-fil-A responded. They said, wait a minute. Everybody is and should feel welcome at Chick-fil-A. We have a fundamental code of conduct at Chick-fil-A. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They serve, basically, if you want to get the numbers there, 140,000 people every day without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity. You come into the store, you're going to get your chicken sandwich. But the bottom line is because you don't hold to our view of human sexuality, because you've given to Fellowship of Christian Athletes or Salvation Army, that's enough to keep you from actually being able to have a restaurant in the San Antonio airport. What can we do?
Well, if you go to our website, txvalues.org, we've got an action alert set up. There's a particular piece of legislation, House Bill 1035, the Free to Believe Act, and it very much makes it clear that there should be limitations on this type of government power punishing businesses and individuals because of their faith and because of their religious beliefs on issues related to sexuality. And it's interesting, too, in this case, because, we're not even with Chick-fil-A. It doesn't appear they've been targeted, at least at this point, because of their views on marriage and sexuality. I mean, I'll say that is been part of the conversation, but a lot of this they tried to point to. The city said because of donations made to a Christian entity. So as you pointed out, Kerby, it has nothing to do with the way Chick-fil-A runs their business, who they serve. They serve everyone. They're not like a cake baker who says, I don't want to put out a particular message. They have been something that you would think folks that disagree with them on sexuality would at least be able to say, well, look, this isn't impacting how they do their business on a day-to-day basis, but even that's not good enough. And so, a lot of people are going to be concerned about how far this goes. That's why we need to have something in specific in law that says local governments, government at any level, cannot punish people based on their religious beliefs regarding issues of marriage and sexuality. That's House Bill 1035.
And I might just mention, again, we have a link. Just click on the picture there, Jonathan Saenz. Right underneath it, you'll see txvalues.org. You can go there directly. We, in the past, have been talking about a different hashtag, which is hashtag ban the Bible bills. This one is hashtag free to believe. And again, we're going to follow up on some of that. And Bill Zedler has been on the program with us before. Maybe we'll have him talk about that particular bill. But it, I think, all comes together, whether you're talking about attempts to ban the Bible and various kinds of bills in front of the Texas legislature, which are trying to advance the LGBT agenda and prevent Christians from being able to be counselors or wedding vendors or whatever. You also have now one to protect them, which is, again, that House Bill 1035, which is hashtag free to believe. And so even though they're kind of two different boxes on your website, they look like two different issues, they all kind of fit under the umbrella of this attempt to prevent you from expressing your sincerely held religious beliefs.
No, that's absolutely right. And a lot of it is because of what's happening at a lot of local government. Okay, the city of San Antonio is a prime example here. You have a local government entity using a policy largely based on sexual orientation, gender identity, even though Chick-fil-A says that they don't operate related to those issues in any way that folks that are LGBT should be concerned. It's part of what the city is using. We've seen them use it in other local governments. And I think it's important for people to understand this is the government punishing a private business entity on this type of issues. The way that you make it clear that we should all be free to believe, that we should have fairness, and we should have an open marketplace when it comes to these issues for people to do business, is you have to have a state law that says the local governments are not allowed to do this. They've gone too far trying to grow government and trying to control the rights of private business owners on these type of issues, particularly on something as fundamental as the First Amendment and religious liberty. Some would maybe argue, well, don't we have the First Amendment? Don't people have religious freedom protection, including private business owners? Yes, but apparently some people don't think that it applies in certain ways. And so the Free to Believe Act is a way to stop these ban the Bible bills, these local sexual orientation, gender identity policies that are government policies that are used to punish people of faith and business owners that have particular faith beliefs.
And again, some of you might just say, well, why is it that Chick-fil-A gave money, for example, to Fellowship of Christian Athletes? Because they really believe in doing things that will help young people in the community. And as you well know, if you've listened to this program any length of time, we've had individuals on this program with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. We've talked with others that have been supportive of them. From time to time, we've talked about various things that the Salvation Army has done that are worthy of support. And it's just in this particular case, as Jonathan points out, this particular issue that there isn't any question that they're discriminating when they hand out chicken sandwiches. They do not. It is not a question about the way in which they hire individuals, because there's no question there. A lot of it, as you point out, really goes back to the kind of financial support they give to organizations like that. And believe me, if you think Chick-fil-A gives a fair amount of money to Christian organizations, just think of the number of times we've had individuals on this program from Hobby Lobby and the money they have given to Christian organizations. So you can kind of see where this goes. And as I pointed out in a column that came out a couple of years ago in Denver, the Denver City Council finally backed down because the Denver attorneys really warned them that a business that is being barred on the basis of political prejudice probably could result in a First Amendment lawsuit that they would most likely lose. So they backed down. And if you've ever flown into the Denver airport and you are walking down that one particular terminal, you'll see this long line, and it's the long line of people going to buy a Chick-fil-A sandwich. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jonathan. And again, we're giving you an opportunity to join in this hashtag free to believe. So again, you can find that at txvalues.org. Also, I just thought I'd mention real quickly, and we'll come back and talk about this briefly, got a couple of bills that are pro-life bills. And so when you look at what has happened in the House, what has already happened in the Senate, and some of the testimony there, we want to get into some of those conversations and just follow a couple of these bills that we've been paying attention to. So if you aren't already subscribing to some of the material from Texas Values, you can go to the website right now and do that. If you'd like to express your opinion to these elected officials, I would highly recommend that as well. All of it you can find at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They came from many walks of life. Several were simple laborers. One was a well-known surgeon. Another a legend and past recipient of the Medal of Honor, whose heroism in World War I earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. But they all came from Prince George's County, Maryland. Educated or not, white or black, rich or poor, their bodies were interred under small grave markers in cemeteries far too distant for their families to ever visit. In 1925, a local post of the American Legion erected the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial to honor 49 men from the county who gave their lives serving the U.S. Armed Forces during World War I. The Fourth Circuit determined the cross-shaped memorial is unconstitutional. First Liberty Institute and our network attorneys at the international law firm of Jones Day appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. By June, we should have a decision. I think the Gold Star mothers who designed the Bladensburg Memorial in 1919 would be pleased. They chose the shape of the memorial to recall the crosses marking the countless American graves on the Western Front of that war. Surely the Constitution permits Gold Star mothers to erect a simple memorial that mirrors those that mark the graves of their sons buried on the battlefields of Europe. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Saenz with us for a few more minutes. Let me just mention, in studio with us next hour will be Stephen Bridge, and he is the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, so we'll be talking with him in just a minute. But Jonathan, I've got one of the posts there by Ted Cruz. He said the details of this story are even worse. San Antonio City Council voted to ban Chick-fil-A from the airport because the company gave to ... the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and Salvation Army. That's ridiculous and not Texas. Hashtag leftist intolerance. So that's one of his comments. And again, if people want to know more about this idea of the hashtag, which you are talking about as well, Free to Believe, we have links to that on the website. But just before we finish off for this particular hour, let's talk about some of the other legislation you've been following. And because I receive all of your excellent updates, one of those was about how the Texas Senate was able to hear pro-life bills. Today in the House, they were able to hear some of those pro-life bills. What's happening?
Well, as a matter of fact, Kirby, the hearing just started, okay, on House Bill 16. This is the Texas Born Alive Infant Protection Act. There was a hearing on this issue in the Senate last week, and that bill is Senate Bill 23. It should be moving forward. Senate Bill 22 was heard last week, and it did move forward so that local governments cannot enter into sweetheart contracts to benefit abortion providers like Planned Parenthood. But I say the hearing just started because the House Bill 16 Born Alive Infant Protection Act hearing was supposed to start in the House this morning at 8 o'clock. I was here bright and early, 7:30, but there was not a quorum in order for the hearing to meet. One of the Republican members had some travel issues getting back in time, and then I think in protest, the Democrats, none of them appeared, and they issued a statement later talking about their opposition, if you will, or on this issue. And so I think that was their effort to not allow the hearing to go forward, and it was successful for a little while. But the House members went on the floor. They came back at 12:30 or so, and they just kicked things off. I just walked out of the hearing room as Jeff Leach, state representative, Texas House member from the greater Plano area, was authoring this bill. And what's striking is the first set of testimony is 3 women that survived late-term abortions, if you can believe that. One of them is Gianna Jessen.
Right.
She was 7.5 months in the womb. She is now in her 40s. She's been working on the pro-life movement for quite some time. Her story, her life, is incredibly important, relevant, and the committee is about to hear all of it.
Well, and again, I might just mention a while back, and not a while back, decades ago, as a matter of fact, I was in Kansas when we were at a pro-life rally, and they introduced, I think for the first time she ever had a chance to speak to an audience, Gianna Jessen, when she was just getting started. I would imagine most of our listeners now are familiar with her story, but she was just getting going, and again, a survivor of late-term abortion. Now, if you want to get some of those facts, again, we just rattled through them fairly quickly, but this is House Bill 16, and our good friend, Representative Jeff Leach, who is on the program with us some regularity, is the author of the Texas Born Alive Infant Protection Act. And then you mentioned 2 others that we should talk about. One, of course, the Senate, which is very similar, Senate Bill 23, and that is the Texas Born Alive Infant Protection Act that was in the Senate. And then you also mentioned Senate Bill 22, that's Donna Campbell's book, to stop taxpayer dollars from funding and supporting the abortion industry. Mention that again, because every time I bring that up, people look at me like, no, that just can't be true. But actually it is, that they allow abortion providers like Planned Parenthood to rent a facility for $1 a year. And as a result, indirectly, we are funding and supporting some of these pro-abortion activities, aren't we?
No, absolutely. And look, it goes against our state policy. It's been very clear for many years. We've had a policy in Texas that tax dollars are not used for abortion providers. So people that, people disagree on this issue. People like you and I, Kirby, many are pro-life. Some people are not. But there's a lot of people that, while they may support abortion, they don't feel like it's right for tax dollars to be used that way. And, you see the even higher population and percentage of people agreeing on that common ground, if you will. A lot of people are surprised when they find out. And they should be surprised in this situation because that is our policy in our state. But governments like the city of Austin, some local governments, I feel, have tried to find a way around of getting this. Other people agree, and lawmakers agree, of getting around our state policy. They decide, we'll just enter into a contract that's very beneficial to an abortion provider where they can rent a government building for a very low price. And it doesn't get much lower than this. This is a building that is 3,700 square feet, and Planned Parenthood is paying $1 a year for 20 years to rent this building that if it was on the fair market, and you could argue that taxpayers would benefit from that, it being used this way, it would amount to almost $40 million over the life of that contract. And so that is money that's being diverted essentially to the benefit of Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider in the country and in the state. And so Senate Bill 22 would make it clear that local governments are not allowed to do that.
And again, I don't care if you're pro-life, pro-choice. You got to say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And we would also bring this up if various Christian groups or pro-life groups who are benefiting the same way. So just before we run out of time, let's talk about this. Again, I've highlighted a couple things on your website, txvalues.org. The hashtag free to believe, that's your action item for today. In the past, of course, opposed the hashtag ban the Bible bills. I thought I'd focus on one other thing on your website, and that is the legislative guide. I know that some of the individual that showed up for your various activities, and you really had an incredible rally down there in Austin, but even if you aren't in Austin, even if you don't plan on testifying before the Texas legislature, getting a copy of that Texas legislative guide would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really the key to knowing what's going on here at the Capitol, or knowing the process at least. And, it's a free resource. You can download it electronically. You can call or email our office here in Austin. We'll ship one to you. It'd be a great resource for churches, for libraries. It's not partisan. We don't even talk about the issues in this guide. We just talk to you about the process. So a very great educational tool that we have as a way to encourage people to engage more in what happens at the state capitol. It's about an 80-page booklet, pretty comprehensive, a lot of good detail, a lot of good stuff in there for young people, maybe a homeschool group, whoever. And so you can go to our website to find that. But look, our budget is almost $800,000 every year. That puts us in a position of creating resources like this so we can be a benefit to people, and so people can show their support by going to our website, downloading the information that we provided, and share it with folks that are like-minded.
And again, I would encourage you to support the organization. I do, and so I'm not asking you to do anything that I don't do. I certainly believe in Texas values, as evidenced by the fact that almost every week we have Jonathan Saenz on here. And keep us up to date on the Chick-fil-A issue and all these other bills, and it is always a delight to have you on the program, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Well, we appreciate you, Kerby. We'll probably have an update on our Texas Values Facebook page later today from the Capitol, and later this week. God bless you.
Again, we have links to the Facebook page, the Twitter account, and all of that on the website. So again, if you don't have a chance to go to TX Values, if you can remember pointofview.net, you got everything you need there. Let me just mention, too, that we've been asking some of you to share your story. And if you've been listening to Point of View for some time and would like to share that story, there's an opportunity for you to go to the website, pointofview.net. You can write it out, or, of course, you can give us a call, 800-347-5151. Well, also one of the other things we always like to do is encourage you to go to Israel. As you may know, we have a trip scheduled in October this time. We'll be going to Israel, and we'll be going to Rome. And so, again, one of the highlights of the trip always is to go to the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. Yesterday in my Sunday school class, I spent some time talking about that, showing some of the videos from that website, which is on our website, gardentomb.com. So we have the privilege of having Stephen Bridge in studio with us next hour. So you might want to listen, and you might even want to call in. Maybe you've had a testimony or something very significant has happened to you when you've been at the Garden Tomb there in Jerusalem. So we are going to be talking about that. And then later we'll get back to issues in the news. We'll be right back.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in the next hour, really spending some time talking about the Mueller investigation. The report dropped, and now, of course, you have the summary from the Attorney General William Barr. We have posted an article about that, which we will get to a little bit later. And again, as you are well aware, 22 months of investigation, 34 people and 3 companies indicted on scores of charges. And I'll break that down a little bit later next hour when we get into that. 2,800 subpoenas, nearly 500 search warrants, about 500 different witnesses, and a lot of hue and cry for very little. But we will get into what many people call the collusion illusion. But we had already scheduled and want to continue with a conversation we're going to have today in studio with Stephen Bridge. Now, he is the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, and we are privileged that he is in town. I might just mention, for some of you in the Dallas area, he will actually be part of an event that takes place at the Museum of Biblical Art. The only problem with it is it's so popular it's already sold out. But we do have a way in which you can maybe get on a waiting list, and that's due to the work of our friends Lifemark Ministries. So if you go to lifemarkministries.org, maybe you can put your name on a waiting list for those of you in Dallas. But this is just an opportunity for just a few minutes to spend some time talking about the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. If you've come with us in some of our tours or gone with your pastor or other churches on a tour, you know that oftentimes the highlight after touring the Galilee and going to Masada and going to the Dead Sea and then going all through Jerusalem, oftentimes the last stop is the Garden Tomb, and what an incredible impact that has to us as well. Stephen lived in a coastal town in southeast England. His father was a Baptist minister. He and his family ultimately were involved in a multicultural intercity congregation, moved to Jerusalem, where first you had the role as deputy director of Garden Tomb, and then in 2015 became the director. I have certainly enjoyed showing your videos, which we have a link to, gardentomb.com. But, Stephen, first of all, thank you for giving us some time here in Point of View.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for the honor of being invited.
You know, this is something that for our listeners, they've got an image in their mind's eye. If they don't, one of the things I would encourage you to do is go to our website right now, click on the picture right underneath Stephen Bridge, and it will show you what it looks like at the Garden Tomb. There are all sorts of videos. By the way, yesterday, because I knew you were coming into town, I showed all the videos, not only by you, but by others, about Golgotha and about the outside the tomb, inside the tomb, and the rest. And so my assignment for any one of you listening is to go to thegardentomb.com and watch the videos. It'll take you a little bit of time, but not much, and you might even want to post it on your Facebook page or something, start a conversation. But tell us a little bit about the history, because when you go there, people are surprised that when they look up at that rock face, which is now, because we had the snowstorm, lost a little bit of its nose, but you can kind of in your eyes or see a picture, it looked exactly like the face of a skull. And that's what caused a lot of people to say, I wonder if this is indeed the place where Jesus was crucified and the place where Jesus was buried.
So I think the interest in looking at the question of could there be a different site to the Holy Sepulchre in terms of the place of crucifixion, burial and resurrection, that debate really started as early as the mid-1600s, then picked up pace through the 1700s. But it was in the early to mid-1800s that debate really kicked off, where a lot of scholars and biblical archaeologists began to say, well, look, the north of Jerusalem, near the Damascus Gate, on what was a busy Roman road, and this rock face that looks somewhat like a skull, could this be Skull Hill or Golgotha that the Bible talks about? Again, you probably know that there are two names, Golgotha and Calvary. Calvary is Latin, Golgotha is Aramaic, and the word simply means the skull.
Skull.
And we know that Jesus was crucified at a place called Skull. We don't know why it was called that. We don't know where it is because the Bible doesn't tell us. But there's a lot of speculation, and that picked up pace through the 1800s. And it was really in the late 1800s when a gentleman called General Gordon. From the British Army visited friends of his, the Spafford family. Again, you'll probably know the name. It Is Well With My Soul was his famous hymn. He was staying with the Spafford family on the wall overlooking what is now called Skull Hill. He saw the rock formation. He saw the shape of the skull. And he thought, well, this really looks like what the Bible describes. And his interest then picked up the interest around the world.
And again, you mentioned in passing, but we might as well mention that as well, it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yeah.
And I know people go there, and I've been to both.
Yes.
And the difficulty there is even if that is the true site, it doesn't really give you kind of an image of what it might have looked like. One of the benefits of the Garden Tomb, which I encourage people to go to both, but especially when you go to the Garden Tomb, it does give you a sense of what it might have been like, because, again, if you look at the scriptures, of course, it talks about being crucified. This is by the Damascus Gate. This is by a road which would lead eventually to Damascus, hence the name. And that's where the Romans would crucify people along a roadside because they wanted to publicly shame the criminals, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then this is a garden. Now, when we say garden, we think an ornamental garden. But what you're talking about is it most likely, and you have evidence, do you not, of the fact that it is at one time probably an agricultural garden? Explain
Absolutely right. When the Bible talks about a garden, it wouldn't really be talking about an ornamental garden. Land was too precious and water was too scarce to have many ornamental gardens. This would have been an agricultural garden, and the area that is now the Garden Tomb, there's clear evidence. There's a wine press that dates to the Roman era, the time of Jesus, right there in the garden, right near the tomb. And that evidences the fact that it would have been vineyards. I mean, wine presses were built in vineyards. And there's clear evidence, going back to the Roman era and the time of Jesus, that area had, once the quarrying had stopped, was redeveloped and was established as vineyards.
And again, that's, I think, significant because if you think about it, Gethsemane and the garden, I mean, you think about an olive press, a wine press. These are various, if you will, gardens or places of agriculture that show up in the scriptures, don't they?
Absolutely right, yes.
Yeah. And so, again, those are some things that I thought were just kind of intriguing about that. But talk about when people arrive, what is the opportunity for them in the Garden Tomb?
Okay, so the Garden Tomb, I think many people think of it as a tourist site, but that's a little bit like thinking that the Canterbury Cathedral is a tourist site. I mean, tourists come, but it is a place of Christian witness and worship. And that the whole focus of the Garden Tomb ministry is to present the good news of the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection of Jesus the Messiah, what that means for our relationship with the Father, what that means for reconciliation. And so that's our ministry. And everyone who comes, if they're part of a tour group, and many are, most are, a guide will take them around the garden, will explain the gospel narrative in the context of the garden, the hillside, Golgotha, and the empty tomb. And the tour's finished with a visit to the tomb itself. After the tour, many groups choose to have a communion service or a time of worship.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the tomb itself, because so far we've just talked about the place where the crucifixion might have taken place. What about that tomb? It is empty. We'll come back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, for decades, sociologists have documented the phenomenon of extended adolescence. This is where someone who is an adult still acts like a teenager. One classic example would be a 35-year-old who has part of their rent and bills covered by parents and continues to take college classes. Jean Twenge, in her latest research on the trailing edge millennials, who she calls iGen, are extending this phenomenon even further. She documents that teenagers are becoming adults even later than the last generation. She argues that teens today are less prepared for adulthood. She also adds that they are safer since the rates of car accidents and teen pregnancies have fallen dramatically. Fewer 12th graders have tried alcohol. Back in 1994, 85% had tried alcohol. Today, only 66% have tried alcohol. Only 73% of 12th graders have driver's license, down from 85% 20 years ago. One of the most dramatic differences can be found in social dating. Only about half of them have been on a date. Compare that to 83% of 12th graders who had been on a date back in 1994 by their senior year. Another dramatic difference is one that we've talked about in the past, work experience. About half of 12th graders have worked for pay, which is down from 72% in 1994. Many more are taking college prep classes or hanging out at home. Now, all of these dramatic changes have resulted in a relatively new term being used by sociologists, emerging adulthood. This is their attempt to describe a new life stage between adolescence and adulthood. All of this reminds me of the jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." Maybe it's time for adults to say to the kids, it's time to grow up. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Stephen Bridge, and he is the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. Let me just mention for some of our Dallas listeners that they had an event for Thursday. Actually do have an event. It just, the bottom line is it is sold out. But if you are interested, maybe you could get on the waiting list. And our good friends at lifemarkministries.org will have that information. It will be taking place in the Museum of Biblical Arts, and it's an excellent opportunity for you to learn a little bit more. I'd also love to hear from some of you. If you have traveled to Israel, and especially gone to Jerusalem and the Garden Tomb, I'd love to hear your comments about your own experience. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those phone calls, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And, you know, when we are talking about some of these issues of archaeology, it just reminds me that one of my most recent booklets is on this issue of archaeology, a biblical view of archaeology, in which I summarize some of the historic archaeological finds. And of course, those would be like the Dead Sea Scrolls and all sorts of things that you can find in Jerusalem. But then just the fact is, there's a whole section here, interestingly enough, that last year really was a banner year for archaeology. There is an article in Christianity Today, and just all the archaeological finds. Now, some of them come from the wall there, the West Wall, and some of that. Some of them come from outside of Jerusalem. There's a couple of reasons. Number one, there has been a lot of peace now in Jerusalem and in the other areas. Matter of fact, some of the finds have been on the border between Israel and Syria, the border between Israel and Lebanon. Those have not been good places to do archaeology, as you will know, until now. And even now, you know, Tel Akish, they're digging there, but sometimes a rocket will land there. But most of the time, this has been a very peaceful time, so they've been able to really do some archaeology. And second of all, if I can point out on the technology itself, some of these new technological finds have given us an ability to read some things that were discovered before. The Ring of Pilate, for example, they've been able to now read his name on that. And so for that reason, if you don't have this booklet on archaeology, it really will confirm your belief in the historical accuracy of the scriptures. We also have a link to gardentomb.com. And we'll come back to that a little bit later, but it tells the story. It has some videos. There's a place for you to pray for them, a place for you to donate, a shop, and also a place to book a visit. But before we do that, let's just finish it off. We've talked about the crucifixion, Golgotha, or Calvary. But then it tells us that Jesus' body was laid into the tomb of a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea. The tomb that you have there is dug out into the rock. It looks like a rich man's tomb. There's an antechamber and a chamber. But talk a little bit more about why that seems significant as well.
So the Bible tells us that right in the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, a rich man's garden. And in the garden, there was a tomb that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. The Bible tells us it was a new tomb carved out of the rock that had never been used before. And what we have in the garden, right near Skull Hill, and in the midst of this agricultural garden we talked about, is a tomb that is at least 2,000 years old. It's a Jewish rolling stone tomb. It is exactly the sort of tomb the Bible describes, in which the body of Jesus was lain. And as you say, you walk into the tomb entrance, you're standing in the preparation chamber, and then the burial chamber is just to your right. And many people believe that just the whole thing fitting together, the narrative of the Bible and the site that you're looking at, this could well be the tomb in which Jesus' body was laid.
You know, some people, if they go into the tomb, have to step up. And the reason for that is you have a channel which would be used by a stone that would be rolled in front. Now, we don't have that stone anymore. Well, that doesn't, that's not surprising. I mean, you have the Byzantines have been there, Byzantine Christians, you have the Muslims, all sorts of things. But you still have the leftover of what would be used to roll the stone. And if we read the story, the women come on that day when the resurrection takes place, expecting to anoint the body, but they're asking the question, who will roll away the stone? So you have elements of this that fit with such precision that you have to at least pay attention to them, right?
Exactly right. I mean, it was definitely a rolling stone tomb. And again, that fits the description very clearly. It's outside the city walls. It's in the midst of a garden near a rock face called Skull Hill.
Now, one of the things I did not learn until I watched the video, because I have never been in the tomb with a guide, is the argument that in the burial chamber, you believe that the body of Jesus was further back. And I'd never thought about that before, but that fits. It has to be that way and fitting the biblical narrative, right?
That's right. It's literally a two-chamber tomb, if you like. You walk into the preparation chamber where the body would be prepared for burial, and then lifting over a little rock lip, you're into the burial chamber itself. Yeah.
But again, his body would be further up, which means it could be seen if you look into the tomb. And according to the biblical description, that's important too, isn't it?
It is important. The Bible describes them stooping and looking inside. They saw the body, or they saw the lack of a body, as it were.
Yeah, and so again, to be able to look in before you're in the tomb to see the body is already gone is another requirement, if you will.
It is, absolutely right.
And again, part of that is kind of back to archaeology. If you take the Bible seriously, and we around this table do, then you start saying, okay, when in archaeology's case, it says that they set out and they traveled to the north, or there was this vineyard in Megiddo, one of the more recent finds, or there were these governors in Jerusalem, then you say, well, I should be able to find evidence for that. And the same thing, when you look at the crucifixion and resurrection narratives, when it says they stooped down and believed, well, he hadn't even gone into the tomb yet. So you'd have to have said, well, then the body had to be over there, or at least where the body of Jesus was, and actually believe. So it's just kind of intriguing. The more you put some of these little pieces together, rather dramatic. Well, again, we can spend a lot more time talking about the tomb, and if you want to ask a question, fine. But I'd love to know about what has been the traffic there. What's kind of the demographics and some of that of people that have come to the Garden Tomb?
Yes, the last 3 years have been remarkable. In 2016, we finished out the year with 235,000 visitors.
Wow.
2017 ended up with 325,000, and 2018 closed out at 405,000 visitors. This year, we're almost certainly over 450,000, maybe more. So the demographics, that affects everything, because we don't just want to fill a garden with more and more people. We want everyone who comes to have a quality experience. And that's been challenged. We don't want to turn anyone away. And so we now open 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, from 8 in the morning till 8 at night, in order to spread the flow throughout the day.
It's just
the most amazing period. The Americans come in great numbers all the time.
Yes.
And English is the most common language spoken in the garden. But the new growth is from China.
That's what I was going to say.
Indonesia,
Mm-hmm.
Malaysia, Southeast Asia generally, and South America. So Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, and Indonesian are the 4 big languages next to English.
And that's one of the things I was going to mention, because we have our tour coming in October. We're going to go to Israel and Rome. Last time we did Israel and Greece, walk where Jesus walked, walk where Paul walked. And this time we'll go to Rome, where Paul was in prison. But one of the things we've heard is we had to postpone our trip because so many people from Asia are now coming to the Holy Land. First of all, just so many people coming to the Holy Land. When we started doing this a number of years ago, nothing like a few Hamas rockets to kind of dampen some people's enthusiasm of coming to Israel. Although I say, and I will say it again, you're safer in Jerusalem than you are in any big city in Europe or in the United States. You really are. But nevertheless, that kind of dampened enthusiasm. But what we're finding now is it's getting harder and harder to even fit a tour in because of the tremendous interest around the world of people coming to Israel. And then because of that, they all want to come to the Garden Tomb. So I just do not know how you make it possible, but that is really something.
Well, that's the challenge.
It is. We're going to take a break, and we come back. Let me open up the phones, give you a chance to join your conversation here. We're going to talk a little bit about what's on their website, gardentomb.com. But if you've been there, I'd love to hear your story. Perhaps you've had a chance to go and to maybe pray, to meditate, to maybe take communion there. I meant to bring in some of my communion cups here from our various trips to the Garden Tomb. We'll talk about that. There is a place for you to support this organization. If you click on the button that says donate, there's also a shop, so you can find out a little bit more about some of that as well. So if you would like to know more, simply go to our website, pointofview.net, or thegardentomb.com. And since we're talking about a trip to Israel, I think we've already filled up our first bus, and so we have one other bus. Only have 2 buses because that's all we could fit in, and again, it requires that you book ahead of time the flights and everything. So if you say, I really would like to go to the Garden Tomb, I would really like to travel with you to Jerusalem and, of course, all of Israel and then to Rome, I hope you'll go to our website, pointofview.net, and find out a little bit more about that as well. But if you'd like to join our conversation, love to hear from some of you that have been to the Garden Tomb. 1-800-351-1212, and we'll take some of your phone calls as we continue with Stephen Bridge right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us a little bit longer, Stephen Bridge, who is the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. And first of all, you mentioned being open 12 hours a day. Well, it doesn't take any amount of imagination to realize that, first of all, I've met a few people that have actually volunteered. So one opportunity is if you are there in Jerusalem, and we have some of our co-hosts that live over there or travel over there, they could actually be one of your volunteers to handle this incredible surge of individuals, right?
Yes, absolutely. The Garden Tomb is dependent on one key team, but two departments in it. We have a team of about 25 permanent staff who are locals, Messianic believers, Arab believers, and people from all over the world. On a team of 25, we have 11 nationalities. Oh, wow. But in addition to that, we have as many as 18 or 20 volunteers, and they primarily do the guiding and the communion preparation, a little bit of helping in the shop, but guiding is the center of what we do.
And again, anybody would be helpful, but if they're bilingual or trilingual, that would be even better, because you are just being inundated by people from all over the world coming to the Garden Tomb, right?
Yeah. So English is the common language,
Yes.
and for many people in the world, English is either their first or second or third language. But the fact is, the growth is from Indonesia, China, Malaysia, South America, and we need languages. It needs to be English plus.
Yes. Let's talk about this for just a minute, because the subtitle of the Garden Tomb is Witness and Worship in Jerusalem. You have a section here on your website on events, and I've seen some video where you've had music groups there, so that is one of the events. But any tour coming through, or even some individuals coming through, sometimes there is an opportunity, usually I should say, an opportunity for communion and things like that. So talk about what is available there.
Okay. So if you're coming as part of a tour, the likelihood is that your guide will book for you a meeting place in the garden. We have up to, I think it's 11 meeting places for group sizes between 30 and, well, the maximum we've had is many hundreds. But most groups are one or two coaches, and we have meeting areas. We provide the communion. Everything we do is free of charge, incidentally. Entrance, the tours, the communions are all free of charge. It's our pleasure to serve and to exalt King Jesus.
Yes.
So the communion services, the worship is led by the tour groups themselves, often with a worship leader. But then we have events that we organize. Easter this year, there are 4 services on Easter Sunday. The first one at 5:30 in the morning, then 7:30, 9:30, and 11:30. And so that sort of event is an annual thing. In addition to that, if you happen to be on tour in the summer months, June through September, then the chances are, if you're in Jerusalem on a Thursday, there may well be a musical event that you can come and enjoy free.
Well, again, those are just some things to consider if you're making your own trip over there. And I have met a number of individuals that either because of business or out of the desire on their own to go there. As I've said before, we always try to provide a tour. This is the third one we've provided to Israel. This one, of course, Israel and Rome. And we've always tried to make it very inexpensive. As a matter of fact, I've had more than a few other people say, what are you guys doing that we aren't? Because yours is substantially less. And frankly, Stephen, one of the things I've run into over the years is people that have said, I've always wanted to go to Israel, but I just can't afford it. And I recognize, by the time you talk about a plane flight and we put you on one of these buses, but we try to figure out some ways to save money. Of course, we stay in a kibbutz when we're in the Sea of Galilee, which I think is just really a lot more fun than staying in a hotel anyway, and all those kinds of things. And we really try to give you a maximum experience, but also one that you might be able to afford. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to feature the Garden Tomb is because it's one of those things that is easy if you're not careful to miss. If you're part of a tour, they'll bring you there. But since it's not inside the walls, it's outside the Damascus Gate, it's easy if you're there on your own to say, well, I've sort of done Jerusalem. And then they find out later there's a Garden Tomb.
Indeed.
And to me, that oftentimes really is the highlight for those individuals, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is one of the top, and using the term tourist, it is one of the top tourist destinations, and it scores very highly on the tourist accreditation sites. And so it really is worth a visit. Very, very worth a visit.
I mean, again, let me just for a minute, I don't mean to be critical, but a lot of people come in with their cameras blazing and everything. But I know that you've had tour guides over the years that have said things like, maybe this would be one time not to be a tourist and put your camera away and just to experience this. You're walking around, and again, I would encourage people to watch these videos. Matter of fact, that's one of my suggestions. For example, the Welcome to the Garden one is just a few minutes long, I think it's about 2.5 minutes long, and that's a chance for you to see Stephen. Of course, you can watch him right now on our broadcast, and you get a sense about kind of the quietness. Because when you're in Jerusalem, it's hustle and bustle, as you well know. Boy, you go to Via Dolorosa, I mean, it is just everything, people talking to you and everything. This is a time to kind of reflect, to meditate, to really just kind of consider what that might mean. And then, of course, there's a time for the communion. And it is amazing to me how that is sometimes one of the more significant events when you've been there for a week, to say, out of all these events, one of the ones that was most significant to me was to go to the Garden Tomb. And I think that's one of the things that you've recommended, that maybe don't be a tourist, don't try to take pictures of everything, but just really experience that, because it's just an opportunity for you to actually consider what the Lord did for us and where we might be. If this is not the tomb, it's certainly like what it was to actually talk about that Easter day, right?
Exactly right, yes. I think it is important that to switch off from being a tourist and become a pilgrim for that moment and reflect on Jesus, who he is, why he died, the fact that God raised him to life, and what that means for our relationship with God.
Let's talk about your website for just a minute, because we talked about some of the events, so that's a way to find out about when some of the music events are taking place. Of course, you have your story. There's a shop, but also donate. Let's talk about that, because I never really thought about this, but when you go on a tour, they sort of take care of everything. But I really want to challenge some of our listeners to recognize the significance that this might have. And so is it possible for people to donate in terms of, we've talked about donating your time as a volunteer, but what are some other ways in which people can help you out?
If I could just mention first that there is a confusion, because I think many people think, well, I've paid for an all-inclusive tour that our guide tells us everything is paid for. Nobody pays to come to the Garden Tomb. Tour operators don't pay. The tour guides don't pay. Nobody pays. There is an opportunity to give, both as you exit the garden or with your communion service. And that really is how the garden functions. We pay our way on the donations of people who visit and what people buy in the shop. And then also, like you're saying now, people might choose afterwards to donate via our website, and that is all really appreciated.
Well, certainly. And again, you pointed out that your staff are all Christians, but some are Arab Christians, some are, in your case, British Christians, and all the rest. So you find yourself as a Christian in a country that is Jewish. So that is also a little bit of a challenge for you as well, isn't it?
I don't know if I'd say it's a challenge. It's just a remarkable opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, on my team, I'll forget some of them, so please forgive me, but we have a Korean, we have somebody from Paraguay, we have Messianic believers, we have Arab believers, both from the West Bank and from Israel, and then the Brits and the Americans and so on, and the Dutch, and so it's a very, very exciting team. And that's just the permanent team. Then you get all the flow of volunteers with all the language and cultures they bring.
And I think that always surprises people, because it'll say where they're from, or they'll talk about where they're from, and you look over and you thought, well, I thought everybody's going to be Jewish or a Messianic Jew or something like that, or maybe some British people. And yet, like you said, I remember the one from Korea and Paraguay and all that. Just amazing. So we need to take a break, and when we come back, just a few more comments about the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. But if you have any comments or questions, we would love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. As I also mentioned, we do broadcast not only on our website and by satellite, but we also broadcast on our Facebook page. So if you would like to leave a comment there, we'll read those in just a minute as well. But we're privileged to have with us for just another few minutes Stephen Bridge, and he is, again, the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. And then we come back, we'll get into the news, and that'll be the Mueller Report, and we'll cover that for an entire hour next hour. But if you'd like to join us on this topic, I thought it would be of interest to you, since it's very rare we get somebody like this in Dallas, and he'll be at an event on Thursday in Dallas, as well as a couple of other places. So we just wanted you to have a chance to hear that. And if nothing else, hopefully that will encourage some of you that have been thinking about going to Jerusalem to join with us on our tour, which will be taking place in October. We spend a week in Israel, then a few days in Rome. In the past, we've done also Israel and Greece. That has been fascinating as well. to go to Corinth and Philippi and a variety of other places. This time we'll go to Rome. And so just some great opportunities for you to walk where Jesus walked, to also walk where Paul walked. And so we certainly encourage you to go to our website and find out a little bit more. Or if you'd like to talk to somebody off air and get a brochure, 800-347-5151 is a different number to call. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They came from many walks of life. Several were simple laborers. One was a well-known surgeon. Another a legend and past recipient of the Medal of Honor whose heroism in World War I earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. But they all came from Prince George's County, Maryland. Educated or not, white or black, rich or poor, their bodies were interred under small grave markers in cemeteries far too distant for their families to ever visit. In 1925, the local post of the American Legion erected the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial to honor 49 men from the county who gave their lives serving the U.S. Armed Forces during World War I. The Fourth Circuit determined the cross-shaped memorial is unconstitutional. First Liberty Institute and our network attorneys at the international law firm of Jones Day appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. By June, we should have a decision. I think the Gold Star mothers who designed the Bladensburg Memorial in 1919 would be pleased. They chose the shape of the memorial to recall the crosses marking the countless American graves on the Western Front of that war. Surely the Constitution permits Gold Star mothers to erect a simple memorial that mirrors those that mark the graves of their sons buried on the battlefields of Europe. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Stephen Bridge with us for a few more minutes, and let me first of all encourage you to be participating. One idea is a volunteer. So if people want to volunteer, they just have to click on one of the buttons there so that it says Join Us, as that's where they can find out a little bit more. And again, it says Become a Volunteer. So if you click on that button and you are going to be over there, you know, and if I were over there not leading a tour, I would do that because I think that would be a lot of fun. So, again, we have at least one volunteer that's watching the program here today. So that's one way in which people can participate, right?
Absolutely. And it's the core, it's the key of our whole ministry to have people coming across for a month or 2 months or up to a year, if they can give us the time, who are passionate about their faith, who love people and just want to share in quite a brief period of time. Each tour is only half an hour and the talky bit is only 10 minutes. So, but if you're passionate about your faith and want to give some time to doing that in maybe even the place where the whole thing took place, then please contact us. And if you have a language in addition to English, top of the list.
For sure. And again, the donate button is where, as you pointed out, and I thought I would underscore that again, even if you've made a trip to Israel, and maybe you've even been with us on one of our previous tours, it is important to recognize that they are still supported by your financial donations. So
Absolutely.
if you think this is a good idea, I'd hope you would consider that. And one other one, I recognize that there are a number of people listening right now that say, I'd love to go to Israel, just probably never going to happen. Is there a way that I can sort of participate? And I wanted to work through the videos, because the first one I mentioned, it's called Welcome to the Garden, and that's where you're front and center.
Yes.
About 2.5 minutes long. I've shown it in my Sunday school class,
right.
and that gives people kind of a nice overview of the garden tomb. So if you're a pastor, a Sunday school leader, a small group leader, Bible fellowship leader, you can easily show these videos, which are available. Then I thought we would also talk about the 3 other videos. These are done, I think, by Philip, right?
That's right.
And each one of them, first of all, you have one on Skull Hill. So that gives people an opportunity to kind of see where Golgotha would be, and shows a little bit of a picture of what that looked like before some of the erosion's taken place. So that one really kind of helps set the scene for where the where the crucifixion took place, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And then you have one on the outside of the empty tomb. So that then sets the place about this agricultural garden and some of the things that you found. Because didn't you, I think, find that there was a wine press that goes all the way back to, the Roman era, something like that?
The wine press was discovered about 100 years ago, about 95 years ago, and it authenticates the fact, the clear link between the tomb and Skull Hill. It sat in an agricultural garden. A wine press would always be in a vineyard, and it's Roman era, time of Jesus.
And then the last one is when it's called Worship the Risen Lord, or it's kind of inside the tomb, and it helps you understand a little bit about the antechamber and the burial chamber, and how this would have been done, and where the funeral would have taken place, and those kinds of things. So those are just some great opportunities to use those videos in a way that would be helpful. If you don't mind, I'm going to have you put on your headphones here, because I want to take a phone call or two, and we won't take a lot today, but I'll get more of those in the next hour. But let's go out to California first. David, I would love to answer your question if I can.
Oh, afternoon. I'm a big fan of Mark Twain, and when he wrote his Innocents Abroad, he talked a lot about going over to the Middle East and the Holy Land and Israel, and I guess it was before Israel, technically. But one of the things I wanted to ask is about security. If I understand right, there are 2 things that are going on right now that are really heating up, and whether it would be a smart idea to travel over there. The Golan is a section that used to be a part of Syria,
right,
and it was captured in 1967. And the United Nations has been demanding that Israel give it back. And about 3 years ago, Netanyahu sold the fracking rights to Dick Cheney. And then just today, Donald Trump has decided to let Israel keep it. So this is really stirring things up in the United Nations, where, if you can steal it, you can have it in terms of land with military actions. The other thing is Jerusalem. When Israel was put together in 1946, Jerusalem was seen as an international city important to all 3, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, and that it was forever to be an international city and recognized as an international city. Now, also, Trump has decided to let Israel capture Jerusalem, and it'll basically become only a Jewish city. So he's also demanding that war be stirred up in the name of a land grab.
Okay, you've got a couple of issues there. First of all, the Golan Heights. This was a decision that no president up until now has said, we think that the Golan Heights need to be under Israel, and there's a very good reason for that. If you've ever been there, even though you have UN troops still there, you can see that if you wanted to protect Israel, putting rockets on the Golan and firing them into the Galilee, very difficult to defend. So obviously that's one of those issues. But even to this day with Jerusalem, even though we've moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, you still have the various sectors of Jerusalem, don't you?
Absolutely right. I mean, to avoid at all costs getting into politics at the moment, the fact is that nothing on the ground has changed, certainly regarding any of the holy sites, the old city, the Garden Tomb. Nothing's changed. It's very safe. If there's ever going to be a problem, it's always well publicized. No point in having a problem if the press aren't there in advance.
Yeah.
So you know if something's going to kick off. And it simply is. I've lived in central London. I've lived in a relatively tough part of southeast London. And my wife and I both feel a lot safer living in Jerusalem than we did there. It is simply a safe place to be.
You know, one of the things I noticed was when I was over there before that any incident that takes place on the Temple Mount or any incident that takes place in one of those sectors of Jerusalem, which is still pretty much of a divided city, gets international attention. When you think of the number of shootings that take place in American cities that don't even sometimes get national attention, there is a sense in which you sometimes wonder why there's maybe a little bit too much emphasis put on the few times in which you've had incidents in Jerusalem, because I've had most people say I feel safer in Jerusalem than I do in any of the American or British cities.
Absolutely.
Well, just before we run out of time, let me, if I can, real quickly come back to what is available on the website. And again, as we have encouraged you to find out a little bit more, go to gardentomb.com. And first of all, there's those 4 videos. I think they're really very helpful to understand that, as well as if you wanted to know about some of the events that are going to take place, that is the case. And if you could volunteer to help or give to that organization, that would be an opportunity as well. And I'm sorry that we can't publicize some of the places where you're going to be because you are so popular that you have sold out the venues. So we'll see if we can do that again sometime. But it's just been a delight to have you in the studio with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a huge blessing. And thank you very much for that.
Again, the website is gardentomb.com. You can find all of that on the website, pointofview.net. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to hear this again, I learned a little bit more about the Garden Tomb and about some of that, feel free to go to our website. We have the watch section and the listen section. So if you would like to listen to the podcast again or pass it on to your pastor or others that maybe are going to be going to Jerusalem, take the time to pass it on. Of course, very shortly after this interview, it will show up on the YouTube channel so you can watch it again. And this would be, I think, a great orientation before you go to Jerusalem. And if you know somebody that's heading in that direction, I hope that you'll take the time to send some of the interview that we've done today with Stephen Bridge on to them. Come back from the break. Well, we have a lot to cover. That is the Mueller Report, and so we'll certainly take some of your phone calls then. So if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View,
and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Is that we're going to spend some time talking about the Mueller report, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's get a few facts on the table, then maybe a couple of perspectives, and then, of course, we'll take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. First of all, 22 months, a lot of money. We'll get into that a little bit later. Brought convictions of a number of individuals for lying. We'll come back to those individuals in just a minute. But in all, 34 people, 3 companies indicted on scores of charges. Many of those were Russian, but some were a part of the Trump campaign. So we'll talk about that as well. 2,800 subpoenas, nearly 500 search warrants, and interviews with about 500 individuals. So those are just a few of the basic facts about the Mueller report. The piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal referred to it as the collusion illusion. And I love how they start out and say, well, so much for the claim that Donald Trump or his campaign conspired with Russians to steal the American presidency. That conspiracy theory, which has distorted American politics for more than 2 years, expired in an instant Sunday when the Attorney General, William Barr, delivered Special Counsel Robert Mueller's principal conclusions to Congress. I'll come back to whether or not we should have full disclosure. By the way, that's my position, and also one that we have on one of our articles here by Andrew McCarthy. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But let's, if we can, finish a couple of points that were made there as well. The Russian conclusion in particular ought to be good news, they say, for all Americans. Mr. Mueller spent 2 years and the vast resources of the FBI and the Justice Department to search for collusion. He found ample evidence that Russia did try to influence the election, but he found that no one in the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russian-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign. That's the direct quote from the Barr assessment on that as well. Now, they also say that the end of the collusion illusion should also cause the media to do some soul searching. I'll get to that a little bit later this hour because of the concern about the so-called rushes to judgment. For 2 years, they say, with the help of ex-Obama officials, they spun anecdotes of contacts between Russians and Trump campaign advisors into a conspiracy. They said with few exceptions, they went well beyond the First Amendment oversight into anti-Trump advocacy, but it was always odd that those individual Russian Trump contacts never added up to anything or went anywhere, which is why we warned about waiting for the facts. And, of course, we haven't spent around this table a whole lot of time talking about the Mueller report or even the Mueller investigation for a lot of reasons. First of all, the few times we even speculate on it, people say, well, you haven't seen the report yet. I thought, no, but most of the people speaking in various of the talking head shows hadn't seen it either, but they had no problem making all sorts of claims. And a little bit later, I do want to get into some of that because there are a few people that, if nothing else, are starting to say, this is maybe a time for, as we just mentioned a minute ago, some soul searching, some reevaluation of some of the individuals that were put on some of these cable news shows to actually allege connections and conspiracy and collusion that was never there. But nevertheless, again, the report, according to the summary that we have so far, is one that says that it did not find the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in order to influence the election. But on the other particular issue, which I want to come back to in just a minute, is something to talk about as well, and that is that we certainly have on the question of the obstruction of justice, the response from Robert Mueller, who, as I thought was interesting, NBC News reminded us, which I'd kind of forgotten about, that he was a Vietnam vet, individual that had served in the military, individual who actually ran the FBI after 9/11. They said did something that surprised many who know him, and that is he punted. They said Mueller didn't draw a conclusion one way or the other on obstruction, Barr wrote, but instead set out evidence on both sides of the question. Barr said that it was because Mueller considered those facts and legal questions difficult to answer. Now, the quick answer to some of that might be simply this. That is, if there's no crime, there's obviously no obstruction. But I would, for just a minute, thought I would quote from Alan Dershowitz, who's been on the program at least twice with us. On most issues we talk about around this table, don't necessarily agree. But I do appreciate the fact that he's really kind of been standing on principle many times. Used to be, of course, with the ACLU and then got frustrated and left because it became too political. Has come on to various talk shows to simply say, wait a minute, that's not true, or wait a minute, that's not right. And just the other day, Alan Dershowitz, who, of course, was a former professor of law at Harvard University, interestingly enough, was very concerned that Robert Mueller's final report sounds like he said, and I'm quoting him, a law school exam, unquote, where he felt like he had shirked his responsibilities and, again, didn't have the guts, again, that's his word, to make a decision. And then also is very critical of some of the talking head shows. I think he singled out CNN, but he could have also singled out MSNBC or some others who misinformed the American public. And so the direct quote from Alan Dershowitz was, I thought it was a cop-out for him to say there was not enough evidence to indict, but it's not an exoneration, and we're going to put the report out. And he says, you know, it sounds like a law school exam. That's not the job of a prosecutor. The job of a prosecutor is decided yes or no and to make a decision. So if nothing else, that is the case. And, of course, let's be honest, the Mueller investigation did find evidence that Russia attempted to influence the election, primarily to try to divide the country. That's why Robert Mueller did indict 25 Russians, including 12 intelligence officers. And so those are some important points to bring out. And I thought it was interesting. Gary Bauer brought out something that people from time to time have mentioned, because you have to ask, okay, who was in charge of the American government when Russia was attempting to interfere with the election? Well, that'd be back in 2016. Who is the president? Well, that'd be Barack Obama. Who is the vice president? That would be Joe Biden. Who is the attorney general? That would be Loretta Lynch, and a variety of other people. John Brennan, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, James Clapper, James Comey, and a variety of other people that are sort of anti-Trumpers that were in the Justice Department or the FBI. And at least to be fair, President Trump at that time was candidate Trump and really had no lever of government which could actually be used to affect that particular outcome. When we come back, though, what about this? Is it perhaps time, even past time, to say, let's get full disclosure? That's the argument I'm going to make, and I'll explain why on two different reasons, two very significantly different reasons why full disclosure, I think, is appropriate. So let's take a break. But if you'd like to join us, perhaps you have some thoughts about the Mueller investigation, about the Attorney General's summary of the Mueller report, and maybe even about full disclosure. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, for decades, sociologists have documented the phenomenon of extended adolescence. This is where someone who is an adult still acts like a teenager. One classic example would be a 35-year-old who has part of their rent and bills covered by parents and continues to take college classes. Jean Twenge, in her latest research on the trailing edge millennials, who she calls iGen, are extending this phenomenon even further. She documents that teenagers are becoming adults even later than the last generation. She argues that teens today are less prepared for adulthood. She also adds that they are safer since the rates of car accidents and teen pregnancies have fallen dramatically. Fewer 12th graders have tried alcohol. Back in 1994, 85% had tried alcohol. Today, only 66% have tried alcohol. Only 73% of 12th graders have driver's license, down from 85% 20 years ago. One of the most dramatic differences can be found in social dating. Only about half of them have been on a date. Compare that to 83% of 12th graders who had been on a date back in 1994 by their senior year. Another dramatic difference is one that we've talked about in the past, work experience. About half of 12th graders have worked for pay, which is down from 72% in 1994. Many more are taking college prep classes or hanging out at home. Now, all of these dramatic changes have resulted in a relatively new term being used by sociologists, emerging adulthood. This is their attempt to describe a new life stage between adolescence and adulthood. All of this reminds me of the jingle, "I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid." Maybe it's time for adults to say to the kids, it's time to grow up. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the issues I want to address this hour, or this part of the hour, I should say, is should there be disclosure of the entire Mueller report? I'll give you kind of a point, counterpoint, so you can see both sides of that. One of the arguments that has been made, and it is compelling, by the way, is that there are a number of individuals that are saying we shouldn't really be releasing the entire report because the report concludes that the president did not commit a crime. The report should not be released because there is no evidence of collusion. End of discussion. And there are some people with pretty good legal credentials to address that issue. Ken Starr is a name that you would know. He was, as a matter of fact, one of those special counsel individuals that was involved in the investigation, which was used in terms of the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And he, as well as other people, I'll mention like Mark Levin, who served in the Attorney General's office, and of course is a talk show host, and others, have said that pretty much the tradition has been in the United States that if an individual is not indicted, then you don't really want to drag them through the mud by leaking details of an investigation when there was no crime that was found. And so there is certainly some argument that could be made there. And our friend Gary Bauer, I'd like to get him on sometime soon. By the way, we're going to have Jerome Corsi on tomorrow, and I might just mention that he has argued that the Mueller report has vindicated him, which is all the more reason to say, well, maybe we need to have the Mueller report then to see how he's vindicated. So that would be an argument for, which I'll get to more in just a minute. But Gary Bauer, who I also will hope to have on soon, I love what he said in a piece that came out just this morning. Don't miss the irony that for the last 2 years, we and many others have been asking for documents to be made public regarding who said what to the FISA courts that set off the unprecedented government monitoring of a presidential campaign. But we were told at the time that that information is too sensitive to release. Then he goes on to say that some of these individuals in Congress and their media allies have also been demanding that every word of the Mueller report defended the Justice Department and the FBI when it regularly sent incomplete information and redacted memos to congressional investigators for the past 2 years. Now, all of a sudden, they want total transparency. So you can kind of see where this debate is going to go. Is it important to actually have full disclosure or not? I will make the case in just a minute for full disclosure for 2 reasons. But let me first of all point to the last article on our website by Andrew McCarthy. You might say, again, who's Andrew McCarthy? We've had him on before, but it's been a while. And again, he's a senior fellow at the National Review Institute. But he's also the individual who was responsible for prosecuting the first perpetrators of the first attack on the World Trade Center, and so knows quite a bit about some of the legal issues involved. And what he says is after Mueller's exoneration of Trump, full disclosure. He says FISA applications, the testimony in secret hearings, the scope, memorandum, all of it. Because he says the news that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, has closed his investigation without recommending criminal charges against President Trump is a relief. It is not a surprise. He says, nor is it a surprise that the news has the various people critical of Trump clamoring for full disclosure of the special counsel's final report. He says, mind you, when skeptics of the Trump-Russia investigation ask what the criminal predicate for it was and on what basis the Obama administration had decided to monitor the opposition party's presidential campaign, we were admonished about the wages of disclosure, kind of the point that was made by Gary Bauer just a minute ago, because this would compromise defense secrets, deep cover intelligence sources and methods and things like that. Why to ask for such information was to be an insurrectionist seeking to destroy the FBI, the Justice Department, and the rule of law. Now, though, it's only the uncharged president, so disclose away. So he said, okay, if we're going to have full disclosure, then fine, but let's have full disclosure. That means Mueller's report in addition to the FISA applications, the memoranda pertinent to the opening and continuation of the investigation, the testimony in secret hearings, the scope memorandum by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein issued on August 2nd, 2017, after failing to cite a crime when he appointed Mueller. He said, let's have it all. And he says, as far as the special counsel's report goes, because of the way the regulations work, at least when the Justice Department follows them, we now have Mueller's bottom line, but not his reasoning and the underlying facts. It is the opposite of the Trump administration's preferred Roger Stone and George Papadopoulos scenario when Mueller's team spends pages and pages of, gee, sure seems like there's a lot of collusion here, before you flip to the end and find there's no case. Just a campaign hanger-oner who lied to an investigator long after an imaginary espionage conspiracy occurred. So he goes on and gives us some of those examples. I won't go into all the details. This is something that we've posted for you to read. And if you'd like to read it in its entirety, make sure you have some paper in your printer, because mine took 10 pages to print out. But he says, since before Robert Mueller was appointed, I've been contending, he says, that there was no legal basis for the appointment of a special prosecutor. For nearly a year and a half, I've maintained that Mueller had nothing close to an actionable collusion case, that he had no prosecutorial obstruction case, and that this exercise was an impeachment investigation geared towards rendering Trump unelectable in 2020. So the bottom line is there was probably, and he goes into then details for the following 7 pages into why we should not have had a special counsel, why it was expensive and very frustrating, which led to a number of people, by the way, actually being accused and in some cases now pleading guilty to lying, but it certainly did not give us the issue of any kind of actionable case. Which brings me to another piece by David French, who points out that he agrees with his colleague Andrew McCarthy, because if nothing else, first of all, this letter is good news, as he says, because Americans should feel even greater confidence in the legitimacy of the 2016 election. He says they should reject once and for all the lurid conspiracy theories that have dominated parts of the internet and gained entirely too much purchase in the broader media. Again, the summary by the Attorney General William Barr is, quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities," unquote. So in the midst of that pretty obvious statement, then you have, of course, Beto O'Rourke saying that we still have cover-up and we still have actionable items. But since we're going to be, after the break, talking a little bit about the media, let me use one of the examples David French uses, and that's from MSNBC, Joy Reid, who says that the report feels like the seeds of a cover-up are here. Whew. David French quickly responds by saying this is irresponsible rhetoric. There's no evidence of a cover-up. Instead, there's a great deal of evidence that Mueller conducted a thorough and diligent investigation. But, again, back to the point, he agrees with Andrew McCarthy about the fact that the American people do need full disclosure, but not just the Mueller report, but the FISA applications, the supporting documents, the classified testimony, any other evidence relevant to not just the Mueller investigation itself, but the inception of the Trump-Russian investigation. And this conclusion is rendered even more urgent, he says, by two important political realities. So when we come back from the break, I want to talk about those two realities. And if you've got some notes, you might number 1 and 2. One, I think, then sets aside kind of the liberal progressive conspiracy theory. The other will then set aside or confirm the conservative kind of conspiracy that all of this was ginned up by the Clinton campaign, and there is corruption, but it was Democrat corruption, and so we'll get into that as well. So he's got some really good points about why a full disclosure would be helpful to set aside one conspiracy theory, which I think has been set aside, but really bury it. And number two, either verify or set aside another conspiracy theory that you hear so often in some of the conservative talk radio. So we'll come back and talk about that. And also, while we're talking about the media, it's probably worth a little bit of time for soul searching to say, in all of the hairs on fire comments that have been made over the last 2 years, we now know so much of it really was irresponsible. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, but if you'd like to join us in this last half hour, 1-800-351-1212. Take a break. Take some of your calls right after this.
From Thinking Man Films and Fathom Events comes Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. A new documentary follows investigative filmmaker Timothy Mahoney's faith-affirming journey throughout the Middle East in search of scientific evidence that Moses wrote the first books of the Bible.
The Lord said to Moses, "Write this in a book."
Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. In theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only. More information is available at patternsofevidence.com/Moses.
Is there a lot of free time in your schedule? Probably not. Most of us are on the go all the time, and Point of View is ready to go with you no matter where on the go is. Visit the App Store for your phone or tablet and search for Point of View Radio. Our app lets you listen or watch anytime it's convenient for you. And since we're told to be doers, not just listeners, the app provides a quick way to take action on the issues we're talking about. You can send us a question, find a local radio station, read articles, listen and share Kerby's viewpoints, commentaries. It's a lot of impact in one little free app. Visit the App Store today, right now, and download the Point of View Radio app. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back for the final hour. I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. One of the arguments that you can make for the full disclosure is, of course, the need for people to see it. But I think David French breaks it down even better and says, really, there are two really powerful reasons for it. And they're very, very different, by the way. The first is to recognize that even though we have kind of the Attorney General's summary of what indeed was done by the Mueller investigation, how many people in the mainstream press, how many people who are Democratic operatives or commentators are going to accept that? And so there is one reason. But the second, with full disclosure, is also to deal with the other part of that. Because right now you've got almost two conspiracy theories going on simultaneously. And if you have not occasionally taken the time to switch back from, say, I'll just pick two extremes, Fox News and MSNBC, you have sometimes wondering whether or not they're even looking at the same material, because they both are kind of perpetuating one of their kind of conspiracy theories. And when I say conspiracy theory, I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. Some conspiracy theories are conspiracies, but most of them aren't. And we've talked about that on this program many times before. But the bottom line is both of them have their narrative, if you don't want to use the word conspiracy for a minute. And the narratives are so different, it's hard to even imagine that they're looking at the same basic facts. And so, again, let me just read from David French, because I think he does a good job of recognizing that we are dealing right now with two different political realities, and full disclosure might help, at least for reasonable people. I recognize that we don't always have reasonable people. Gotcha. But at the same time, for people that at least want to know whether something has happened. And he says the first issue is the obstruction of justice. As the Attorney General, Barr, explains in his letter, the Mueller report neither accuses Trump of committing obstruction of justice in the course of the investigation, nor does it exonerate him. Instead, the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, who are both Trump appointees, let's at least acknowledge that, examined the evidence and concluded that the evidence was not sufficient to conclude that the president obstructed justice. Okay. David French has a great line. Democrats will trust this conclusion exactly as much as Republicans would trust a Democratic attorney general to evaluate the actions of a Democratic president. So we understand that. Just go back a few years and say, okay, if Loretta Lynch had taken an investigation and said this does not in any way or at all affect Barack Obama, how many would the Republicans accept that? So the first thing is by giving the full disclosure of the report, it could set that other part aside, because I guarantee you, of course, it's already happened, but you can turn on any of these programs tonight, and if they tend to be more on the leftist, liberal, progressive side, MSNBC, CNN, things like that, you're going to have people camp out on, okay, maybe there's no collusion, but what about this obstruction of justice issue? We don't have the full report. Well, issuing the full report, knock yourself out. But it also deals with the other, and that is you also have, as he says, second, an important political reality relates to a common Republican theory of the Trump-Russian investigation. That is that it was conceived and pursued in bad faith for wholly partisan political reasons. Now, that may be true, but the quickest way to find out is to have a full disclosure of some of those documents which people have been talking about. Because under this theory, according to people that are promoting that, lots of times on Fox News, but elsewhere, and certainly in talk radio, the entire Trump-Russia controversy truly began with an act of democratic collusion. The Clinton campaign's commissioning of Fusion GPS to conduct opposition research, which led to the so-called infamous Steele dossier. I've talked about this a little bit, but again, We'll see where that takes us. In other words, there was a worse than Watergate corruption in 2016, but it was a Democratic corruption. Now, by the way, if nothing else, got to appreciate David French. And again, it's worth reminding that if there's ever been a never Trumper, it's David French. He almost ran against Donald Trump as an independent in 2016. So in some respects, I appreciate the fact that sometimes he's willing to play a little more fair than some of the partisans. But he said, based on the publicly available evidence, he says, I agree with Trey Gowdy, by the way. Our listeners up there in South Carolina know that Trey Gowdy has said, and others have said, that there would have been an investigation even if we didn't have the Steele dossier. As he said, this investigation had nothing to do with Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting at Trump Tower. It had nothing to do with George Papadopoulos' meeting in Great Britain. It also doesn't have anything to do with the obstruction of justice. But that doesn't mean the creation and use of the dossier was proper, or that the worst Republican allegation shouldn't be examined and evaluated once and for all. Well, I'm mentioning South Carolina. Lindsey Graham said, see you soon. If you haven't seen this before, it's making the rounds of Facebook, and it's got this picture of these trees. Looks like redwood trees. And you've got the idea that, well, just so many questions, and we'll find out what some of those questions are going to be. So nevertheless, one of the other things that David French points out is that if there is anything, it is the fact that Donald Trump did hire and surround himself with some of the worst people in politics, as his line is, felons and liars who sometimes committed crimes in an attempt to cover up their own contacts or attempted contacts with Russian assets or operatives. And first of all, I would have to say that the National Security Advisor, I'd love to know more because we've interviewed him before. And indeed, I'm not so sure that he didn't just simply go along with some of that to spare his family. Of course, we've talked about Paul Manafort. He was actually kind of thrust on the campaign later because they wanted to at least have some establishment figures. But both between the president's personal lawyer, which is certainly on Donald Trump, his campaign chair, and then, of course, we can talk about his national security advisor, it didn't turn out so well for many of those individuals. But nevertheless, we will come back to some of that a little bit later. As a matter of fact, Jerome Corsi will be on tomorrow, and we'll see his argument because he says that the Mueller report vindicates him. I suspect it probably does. And, of course, that would be a good argument for full disclosure of the report. And then Gary Bauer will be with us next week, and we'll probably talk about some of that as well. But before we take a break, let me just real quickly mention something else, and that is that there are more and more people that are saying, okay, we maybe didn't do just a real good job of covering some of this. And since I picked out CNN a minute ago, let's go back to Brian Stelter, who is the chief media correspondent for CNN. And he actually says in a tweet, there's been so much solid reporting about the Trump-Russia mystery, but the media ecosystem tends to reward speculation over straight news. Are there ways to change this? Now, Joe Cunningham says, I got to argue with the first part of that they did solid reporting on it, but he'd let that pass because it brings back to something else. And that is that there's just all this speculation with no facts. And so, interesting enough, in this piece that came out by Joe Cunningham, he says, Fox News even was under fire recently because they hired Donna Brazile, of course, political consultant, a Democrat, highly partisan, and all of the rest. And he said, well, if you want to have Democrats appear or Republicans appear on CNN or Fox or whatever, that's fine. But the problem with this is that we're not really getting true political commentary. What we're getting is what he calls tribal commentary. And I might do a commentary on this because really what's happening is you get three kinds of partisans that show up. Number one, Republicans who are all in for Donald Trump, or Republicans who are all in against Donald Trump, or number three, Democrats who are all in for Democrats. But he says you rarely get someone who's willing to criticize their own side on the merits. Instead, the media, and especially cable news media, likes to play up the partisan divide and rivalry on the air because that's good ratings. And as a result, they believe that more people will watch because of those heated exchanges. I happen to know from many of you listen to Point of View, you don't watch those programs because you are sick of the back and forth and never being willing to find any compromise or concede any of the points. And so the point he's making is there's not really a lot of value to all of that, not at least in a journalistic sense. So he concludes by saying, we may lament the great partisan divide in America, but we can stoke it by letting these things happen. CNN's Brian Stelter's home is one of the worst offenders. Rather than position themselves in between MSNBC and Fox News, they have positioned themselves as the network that will hold Trump accountable. And it's just one more echo chamber with a lot of shouting. I want to come back and talk a little bit more about how the media dropped the ball on this issue right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. They came from many walks of life. Several were simple laborers. One was a well-known surgeon. Another a legend and past recipient of the Medal of Honor, whose heroism in World War I earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. But they all came from Prince George's County, Maryland. Educated or not, white or black, rich or poor, their bodies were interred under small grave markers in cemeteries far too distant for their families to ever visit. In 1925, a local post of the American Legion erected the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial to honor 49 men from the county who gave their lives serving the U.S. Armed Forces during World War I. The Fourth Circuit determined the cross-shaped memorial is unconstitutional. First Liberty Institute and our network attorneys at the international law firm of Jones Day appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. By June, we should have a decision. I think the Gold Star mothers who designed the Bladensburg Memorial in 1919 would be pleased. They chose the shape of the memorial to recall the crosses marking the countless American graves on the Western Front of that war. Surely the Constitution permits Gold Star mothers to erect a simple memorial that mirrors those that mark the graves of their sons buried on the battlefields of Europe. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We've got to admit, we've given almost an entire hour to the Mueller report, which is more than we probably has given to it in terms of time leading up to it, because, again, I think there are so many other things that affect your faith, your family, and your freedom. And so we're going to spend some time maybe tomorrow getting into some other news items. And, of course, we'll have a chance to hear from Jerome Corsi. He might make a case there as well for the releasing of the Mueller report. And I'm all for it because, like I said, we have to set aside a couple of these narratives. I call them conspiracy theories, but you can call them whatever you want. And the more facts, the better. Now, will that appease everybody? No, won't be enough. I got that. But at least for the fair-minded people, they might say, okay, I've seen it. let's move on. But one of the other issues that even people in the mainstream press are starting to say, we got a problem here and we've got to fix it real quickly. And so you're not going to hear me quote Terry Moran at ABC News too often, but I'm going to quote him today because he points out that especially when some of these, CNN-type shows and MSNBC and some of those have brought on John Brennan. Now, first of all, let's recognize John Brennan, former CIA director. Thank you for his service. Not a fan of President Trump. I mean, I was looking at one of his. This is a typical tweet from John Brennan. He says Trump is unprincipled, unethic, dishonest, sycophantic cronies. I mean, on and on. So you can kind of get the sense. Not a fan. Okay, but at the same time, Courtney O'Brien points out it's highly unusual for a CIA director to be so vocally opposed to a sitting president, yet Brennan has frequently taken his vitriol against Trump to cable news. For months, Brennan has suggested he had information that made him believe that Robert Mueller's investigation would result in more indictments for Trump associates, including, I think, didn't he one time say that some of the Trump family was going to be indicted? I think we can say that didn't happen, didn't we? Of course, we know these predictions by, again, John Brennan are wrong. And this caused ABC correspondent Terry Moran to post this the other day. He said that I think John Brennan has a lot to answer for, going before the American public for months, cloaked with CIA authority and openly suggesting he's got secret info and repeatedly turning in performances like this, and then has a link to one of these, diatribes by John Brennan. And again, because he was a CIA director, there's always been in the back of the minds of individuals that were already predisposed to believe him and predisposed to dislike Donald Trump to think he's got the goods, he's got the inside track, he knows indeed what some of the Robert Mueller investigation has, and it turns out that's not the case. And so I think it is really striking when you have the ABC correspondent, Terry Moran, saying, John Brennan really has quite a bit to answer for. Don't take his word for it. Let's take another one. Intercept's Glenn Greenwald actually was very critical of MSNBC for, again, hiring John Brennan, ex-CIA director, to serve as one of their political analysts, suggesting he used his airtime to abuse our airwaves to disseminate self-serving disinformation. Here's the particular tweet from Glenn Greenwald. He says, quote, "You can't blame MSNBC viewers for being confused. They largely kept dissenters from their Trump-Russia spy tale off the air for 2 years. As recently as 2 weeks ago, they had John Brennan strongly suggesting that Mueller would indict," there it is, yeah, "Trump family members on collusion as his last act." So again, there are people that are starting to say, this does not bode well for what last respect the American people have for the media. And I'll pick one more. Frank Luntz, it's been a while since we had Frank Luntz on, but of course he's more of an analyst and also does a lot of surveys and things like that. But again, he said speculative nonsense by John Brennan to fill the time block with no acknowledgments from Lawrence, now that it's turned out to be laughably wrong. And so, again, just a couple of things. And, of course, you might remember, just to be fair, Donald Trump finally revoked John Brennan's security clearance last August. But nevertheless, these are some examples of people that might say, wait a minute, I thought there were the goods. I thought we were one step ahead of everybody else on MSNBC, and as a result, we had the goods. We knew the indictments were going to come. We knew that impeachment was just around the corner. We knew that this would be the end of the Trump administration. Didn't quite turn out that way, did it? So, if nothing else, I just wanted to spend some time covering that. But one last piece just before we take a break for today. And again, we'll have an opportunity to look at some more of this tomorrow. But we're also going to move on to some other topics. In the second hour tomorrow, we're going to get into some of the family issues that are important to your faith, your family, and your freedom. But I thought I might mention, just as we're going to the end of the program here, something else to pay attention to as we're into tax time. And that is, I just the other day was working on some of our taxes, and you've had some of these presidential candidates, and I'll call out in this particular case Senator Kamala Harris, a Democrat from California, also president candidate, who actually said that we are seeing that the average tax refund is smaller than it was last year, which, according to her, is evidence that the tax cuts are just a fraud on the middle class. Now, first of all, I don't almost know where to start with that. If you get a smaller tax refund, what does that mean? That means that maybe your withholding is closer to what your tax bill was. Now, if you want to get a really big tax refund, you could actually have your withholding much greater, and then you'll get a real big refund in April. But whether you get a large tax refund in April or right now even in March or a small one has nothing to do with the tax cuts. It has everything to do with your withholding. But again, I'll just read this piece here. Evaluations from across the political spectrum agree that more than 90% of tax filers received a net cut. Besides, the complaint was made early in tax season. Data from later on now suggests that the average refund is slightly higher than last year's. The same news came out the same day that the Democrats running the House Ways and Means Committee repeated the attack. Refunds aren't vanishing, but this argument against the tax cut hopefully is. So again, if you're going to elect somebody to the presidency of the United States and they don't understand that because the tax refund you're receiving this year is lower than it was last year, that doesn't mean that you didn't get a tax cut. It just might mean that your withholding is a little closer to what your tax bill is. And I hope somebody will explain that to a sitting senator from California who's running for the presidency. And I thought I'd bring that up because, as it was pointed out in this particular article, it was repeated again by a couple of members of the House Ways and Means Committee. So we have members in the House and members in the Senate that don't understand that a lower tax refund has nothing to do with whether or not you got a tax cut. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we have a lot more to cover, so we'll do our best to try to educate you on some of those issues. And if you would like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we've covered today, including, of course, the Mueller investigation, and in the first hour, the director of the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to share your story with us, we still have that available on our website. We want to share that next week in our Truth Team. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
It's amazing but true. When it comes to one of America's biggest household expenditures, healthcare, a lot of people think they've got no choice. People are used to thinking we have to do it this way, but they don't. Yes, you have the freedom to choose an alternative with your healthcare. It's MediShare, and it costs way less than the alternatives. The typical family saves $500 a month, not a year, a month. And if you're single, this can save you a lot too. And let's face it, a big reason MediShare is 400,000 people strong, it just works. They've shared over $3 billion in medical bills, so they can help share your needs too. Joining MediShare for so many people is one of those things that makes you say, why didn't I do this before? So yes, the time has come for something better. Look into joining MediShare and see why so many people are opting out of the old way and into the new. Why not look into this? Just call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.